Hi there, this is Mark Dean from En Masse. Recently, my colleague Andrew Stock and I ran a workshop for your colleagues called Back on Track, Managing Mental Health Issues in Your People. This was hosted on the 14th of November in the Sidley Austin Hong Kong office. This brief video has been designed specifically for those of you who were invited to and were going to intend to participate in the workshop, but for various reasons were unavailable on the day. During the workshop, we talked about the mental health basics, including some of the more common mental health challenges that people would see in Sidley Austin's offices. We talked about recognising the signs early, and most importantly, the GLOBE model for de-escalating and having supportive conversations with people whom you're concerned about and who might be struggling with mental health issues. We also talked about where to go for help and support. The first discussion we had was, when someone is not mentally well at work, what might you see? We talked about how, just like a sprained ankle might stop us from functioning normally, the impact the activities we do every day, mental health conditions can also stop us from thinking, feeling, or behaving normally, and can impact on our perceptions. We went on to talk about managing different types of people, and we talked about what's the difference between an unwell person or someone who's difficult to manage. And we covered some of the key indicators that someone might be unwell, and usually we're looking for a change. And so that means that whilst the person might usually be in a certain state or behave in a certain way, we would often see them behaving differently if they were unwell, as opposed to potentially someone who had a bad mood or tended to treat people poorly regularly, in which case they may not have a mental health issue. But for many intents and purposes, we've also discussed that there can be a lot of overlaps, and it doesn't really matter to differentiate between whether someone's just being difficult or whether they're unwell. If their behaviours are causing issues, then we do have a responsibility to act on that. We discussed that perception really counts, so people with mental health issues often have different perceptions of how things are, and that's what makes it quite complex to manage as well. In terms of signs and symptoms, we talked about the most common 3 mental health issues that people might experience at Sidley Austin, and the most common one is generally anxiety, followed closely by depression, followed by alcohol and substance abuse, which is a diagnosable mental health condition. So how would you spot the signs? We talked about the fact that someone who is struggling might be not showing up at work as much, or perhaps they've got unexplained absences. We also discussed that for various reasons, including that there can be interruptions in people's capacity to think rationally and to concentrate, that they might be prone to be making more mistakes than usual. We discussed that sleep is a big factor, so people who are struggling often complain about having interrupted sleep or bigger sleep problems than they would usually have. And we also talked about how people who are usually quite interactive might start to withdraw a little bit and be a little bit more quiet, or perhaps someone who's usually quite measured and quiet might suddenly demonstrate a temper outburst or respond disproportionately in an angry way to a stimulus or a behaviour in the office. So they might appear to react very intensely to something that didn't seem that big after all. So losing motivation for work and having relationship problems are all very common. People will often feel lonely and isolated and develop physical health problems as well. So we know that headaches and stomach conditions also become more prevalent when people are experiencing more commonly in anxiety and depression, or simply feel unhappy, so it affects their mood. So we had a discussion about this character, Brandon, and he's had someone who's had a lot of stress lately, and he's actually behaving badly as a result. So he's starting to treat staff quite poorly in front of other people as well as privately, and so there is a risk there that Brandon's behaviours are creating. Now, not all people who experience stress or mental health issues, of course, will cause harm to other people, but this may be an issue that shows that Brandon is struggling, and also that there are some risks for his team members. So we talked about in groups what the potential ramifications were for Sidley Austin and the person who's being targeted with the bullying behaviour if we do nothing. We also talked about if we were to have a conversation with Brandon, how would you handle it and what are the big issues to keep in mind. Some of the more common points raised in the workshop included that there may be legal ramifications and there's a duty of care to both Brandon and the staff if we don't do anything and we just let him behave in the way that he is and cause harm to other people. So there may be financial and legal problems relating to that, and of course there is a psychological risk that is being created by Brandon's behaviours. So we have a responsibility to do something. Some of your colleagues said, I would simply start by asking Brandon if he's okay, and that I've noticed he doesn't seem himself lately. And of course, that is a very good place to start. And shortly we'll talk about the model that we will be using to have conversations with people like Brandon, or perhaps even one of his staff members who might be struggling. If somebody tells you that they're unwell, remember that we have a duty to take reasonable steps to ensure that we don't exacerbate or cause mental health issues. Also ask permission to seek advice from HR while still keeping their information private. You can't break confidentiality without their permission unless you believe they are at significant risk to themselves or to others. And we'll talk shortly in a bit more detail about confidentiality. So here is the GLOBE model. The GLOBE model is the 5 steps that we take to have a responsible conversation with someone when we're concerned about their mental health. And each step stands for a stage in the conversation that we're planning for and then will ultimately have with our colleague. The G stands for get organised. The L stands for let's talk about it. The O stands for observe confidentiality. The B stands for be prepared for different reactions. And the E stands for establish an outcome. Let's start with getting organised. This is about preparing for a meeting with your colleague. You might consider the following. What is the purpose of the meeting? And identify if there are any work-related concerns. You're going to plan on agreeing to a pathway forward and develop that plan together. And so it's really important that you make a note of the things that you've noticed that concern you. And you could also think about who already knows, what you can ask and talk about, and what you shouldn't ask and talk about, the best place to meet, and what you'll document. And to get started, we should be just asking, are you okay? And expressing that we're concerned about this person's well-being. But you should avoid asking questions that might be about someone's mental illness if they haven't raised it with you, or a situation that's not related to determining if that person can do the job. Or things that may cause humiliation, like do you think you might be experiencing anxiety or depression, or have you seen a psychiatrist? These are things that we don't want to ask. They could cause humiliation. Or other things that might form the basis of discrimination. So the L stands for let's talk about it. We discussed why meet face-to-face, and some of the reasons include that a lot of our communication, in fact, probably around 90% or more of what we communicate is non-verbal or physical, and therefore we would be looking out for the person's body language. Another reason why it's also important to meet face-to-face is that it shows the individual team member concerned that you are genuinely committing time and are concerned about them, rather than just giving them a call on your way home from work, for instance. At the beginning, just think about what your purpose is. And you're thinking about to check in with you and own up if you've been distracted. Explain that you're concerned about them and their workplace performance, but this is a conversation about their well-being. And try to do that in private then, because it's really important that we don't put someone in a situation where they might become upset and some of their colleagues might see them, or someone in a cafe, for instance, might see them. So do try to find a private meeting space. Take a balanced, calm approach. So don't rush or feel like you have to solve all the issues in this first meeting. In fact, as a rule of thumb, it's very important that you consider this meeting as a meeting that is a step in the right direction, rather than a meeting that is designed to solve all the problems. So you'll probably be having a series of conversations, and that should take the pressure off you for this one meeting. Clarify if they believe the workplace is contributing to the issue. So you might say, is there anything at work that might be causing you some issues? Be prepared to listen more than you talk, and that includes when there's silence. Be prepared just to sit with the person in silence. It's very powerful, and often it's also just very helpful to sit and bear witness to their situation, including if they just want to sit quietly with you. Don't make any promises and don't mention mental illness yet. That is something that we'd prefer that they do if they come to that stage rather than having you suggest it. And after the meeting, do write a few notes. So in summary, the first meeting should be about sounding out what's going on. Use collaborative language like we. We're really concerned about you, and I'm sure we both really want things to work out, and we need to talk together about how we can support you. And do not jump straight into problem solving, even if they want to, so slow it down. The O stands for observe confidentiality. If the person asks, is this a private discussion? Just be aware that there may be some exceptions to privacy and confidentiality, such as where there might be a serious threat to health, life, or safety. So the person might be hesitant initially to talk about mental health. They will be scared of being discriminated against potentially, or being treated differently, and they may feel this threatens their identity in a major way. But in a nutshell, you must ensure that the information about a staff member's mental health issue or status is not disclosed by you to anyone without their consent, and it's only acceptable where it may be required by law or where there is a serious threat to life, health, or safety of the individual concerned or another person. Do encourage them to talk to our EAP, ComPsych. Do have a look at the intranet, and all of their contact details are there. Online, guidanceresources.com, and there is a web ID Sidley Austin. So you can find those details on the intranet as well as some local phone numbers. If somebody says to you, can I tell you something, and you promise me you won't tell anyone, my advice would be just say, look, this is a confidential conversation. However, there may be some situations in which I need to get somebody else involved. If that is the case, we'll talk about that together and come up with some options. How does that sound? Don't forget, HR is there to help you too, to provide advice on policies and procedures, and to coach you on to how to handle the situation. They might actually attend the meeting with you. They may be able to seek permission to speak with the person's general practitioner or doctor, and advise or help define a plan for reasonable adjustments. HR may also take over the situation where it may be really serious or high risk. The B stands for be prepared for different reactions. Have a think about what they might be. Here are some common ones. The person might go into denial mode and say, there's absolutely nothing wrong, it's fine, no, there's nothing wrong with me, and that's okay. If that happens, just repeat back to them, I understand and respect that you might not want to talk about it, but I have been concerned about your well-being. And be prepared to say why. It's not like you to be this way, or it's not like you to be so quiet or withdrawn, and I just want to let you know I'm concerned about you. The person might be upset or cry, in which case just sit with them and reassure them quietly and calmly that it's okay. It's okay to cry. People do cry, and it's a very natural human reaction to being upset. They might go into blame mode or avoid and say, well, it's not my fault, and if everyone else around here behaved properly, I wouldn't be so stressed. You could just sit with them quietly and say, look, I am concerned about your well-being, and I'm certainly keen to hear if there are any work-related factors or behaviours that might be impacting on you. Do not try to problem solve yet, though. Your objective is just to listen and to reassure them that I'm actually concerned about your well-being. Similarly, if the person indicates they're embarrassed or there's some shame, do just simply reassure them that you are concerned about their well-being and that you do want to make sure that they're okay. If they're angry or hostile, you could simply say, look, this is a professional conversation, and I do have a responsibility to speak with you when I'm concerned about a health or safety matter, and I am concerned about your well-being. Be prepared to slow it down. It's okay just to sit with them for a while they burn off some of their steam. The person might also be relieved and reveal to you that they have a mental health issue and that they do really want to get some help, and that is a really fantastic outcome or step. If that happens, just quietly reassure them and thank them for sharing with you that they have been struggling. Let them know that's a really positive step forward and that you're keen to help and that you're going to talk through some ways to help them out. If they're receptive, it's okay to be warm but not overly personal. If they're resistant, don't stop the meeting, don't lose the warmth, just be even more clear and gently say what needs to be said, including, I am concerned about your well-being. If they're angry, try to calm them and perhaps schedule the meeting for later in the day. Feeling uncomfortable with conflict may lead to avoiding or addressing the issue. So try to remember this is a professional situation and we do have some obligations. Don't personalise it, otherwise that might make it harder for you to follow up with the person and more likely to avoid it. Try not to rush the meeting because your team member is upset, which results in not discussing the issue. Try not to respond in an aggressive manner when your team member is angry. This escalates the emotion and denial of the issue. And don't jump straight into problem solving. That prevents demonstrating empathy, which is about sitting, taking your time, and really showing that you care and you're listening. The E stands for establish an outcome. If your staff member says there are no issues, respect their response and accept what they're telling you. Note that staff members don't have to disclose their mental health issue to you. However, it's very helpful to say to them, look, I do want to follow up and make a time. I would always ask them, what would suit you? Would you like to see me at 10 o'clock tomorrow or maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Giving people choices is very helpful, but always do make a follow-up point. Even if the person denies they're an issue, just let them know, look, I'm going to come back and swing past and see if you're okay at the end of the day. If the person has disclosed that there are some issues that they're experiencing and we need to make some reasonable adjustments, you'll be doing that with the help of HR. You might want to plan communication to the rest of the team, but of course while respecting confidentiality. You might say something like, look, it's likely the team will notice the change in your responsibilities or working hours. We don't need to tell them your diagnosis. However, if we say nothing, you may get asked questions directly that may be difficult for you to answer. What would you be comfortable communicating? We could say that you have a personal health issue that is being managed at the moment, and hence the reason for the change in your responsibilities. It's just for a temporary period, and we'd really appreciate your understanding. How does that sound to you? Do always follow up, so ensure you monitor, check in, and keep communication lines open. If they say they can't do their job, set the wheels in motion for a respectful process of leaving, and we would always do that with the help of HR. Key principles to bear in mind are that when people are unwell, keep in mind that most people can and will recover. The reassurance that we're keen to meet you halfway is helpful. The line core components of your job is useful, especially when looking at what are reasonable adjustments which don't extend to not doing the job at all. It's more about how and when and how much of the job the person might get done for a period of time. But again, that is always with help from HR, who will most likely talk to the person's treating physician. We do everything that you can sensibly do, but also acknowledge what's beyond your control. The individual also needs to take some responsibility. You may need some help and support yourself through this process. Don't forget that the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, is there for that as well. So you can always ask team members, have you thought about talking to the Employee Assistance Program? And help them find the details, encourage them to have the conversation, and to then follow up with them. They don't need to tell you what was talked about, but just to follow up and say, how did that go? Are you doing okay? And you should also speak to the Employee Assistance Program yourself, whether you're stressed as a result of somebody else's behaviours or you simply want some help and support as a manager. They're there to help and guide you as well. I hope you've found this brief video helpful, and do have a look at the tip sheet that's been distributed as well on using the globe model. Thank you and bye for now.